のように侍は
So ever since playing the game Like a Dragon Ishin, I've wanted to find movies about Ryoma Sakamoto. Basically, he was a samurai that wanted to end Japan's class system, and just to ultimately create a society of equality. And I feel like that's a message that anyone can agree with. So in order to find some films about him, I asked my friend Merlin from SamuraiDVD.com. And he actually sent me quite a few movies, which I hope to review all on this channel. First he gave me the Assassination of Ryoma, and that was one I already covered. He also sent me The Man Who Assassinated Ryoma, another was called Anatsu, and Bakumatsu. After watching these, I kind of feel bad for Ryoma. I mean, he gets killed in every single one of these films. I was kind of hoping one of them would change history just so that he wouldn't get a sword to the head. But if you want any of these films, you could get them all on SamuraiDVD.com. You could also use the discount code BUSHIDO BLUES at checkout. Get yourself a nice discount. So Bakumatsu, also known as the Ambitious, also known as The Last Days of the Shogunate. It was a 1970 film that was written and directed by Daisuke Ito. It takes place at the end of the Tokugawa era. This was the Bakumatsu period. Ito was 71 years old at the time when he directed this. He's been directing since the silent film days, and he was real big into making samurai cinema. But by the time he took on Bakumatsu, well, let's just say he was pretty old by then. So, looking into this film, I found out that the film's lead, Kinnosuke Nakamura, was also the film's producer. And by the looks of it, it looks like he had a little bit too much power over this project. So if Ito noticed a problem with, say, his acting, or overacting, I don't think he was really in the position to tell him that. I don't think he was able to really overstep the boss. So for a while, the actor Nakamura was the biggest cash cow star for Toei. And with this film, he may have felt just that kind of freedom. He was finally able to call the shots for once. But in 1970, Japanese cinema was beginning a decade-long economic decline. There was about to be fewer theatrical releases, and many of the big stars were moving over to television. And I remember hearing in a commentary about how Akira Kurosawa was angry with Toshiro Mifune for doing this exact thing. I think Kurosawa was mad that he was doing Shogun, and that actually ended up being the reason why the two broke up. And speaking of Mifune, where was he in this film? He shows up an hour and a half in for just one scene, and for some reason he's dressed as James Bond. I guess this film really was Nakamura's show, and even Tatsuya Nakadai was pushed to the side. He didn't have a big role at all. And I was actually pretty excited when I first heard that these three big actors were going to be in this, and that was a bit of a disappointment. I felt like Nakamura was good in this as Ryoma, but there was scenes where his acting was a bit exaggerated. I felt like this role would have worked in some other films, but in this film, especially alongside Nakadai, who's just such a natural actor, Nakamura just ultimately suffers in comparison. And at times he seems more like a screen hog than the convincing character that he was supposed to be. Bakumatsu wasn't the ideal time for Nakamura to start his own independent film company, though he wasn't by any means the only one attempting this. Unlike many other producers, Nakamura was not cheaping out on this film. He spared no expense in his desire to make Bakumatsu a major film. He wanted it to be both exciting and intelligent. He added a major cast, the big three, and it was a bit too long. Sadly, it came off as the Nakamura show, and he almost bankrupted himself betting too much into this one movie. In the end, he did save his company, but like many other actors at the time, he also headed over to television. But a few years later, he had more bad luck. And this was because he lent financial support to his friend and big star Shintaro Katsu. He also founded his own production company, but Katsu was also known to be a big drinker and he liked to gamble a lot. And this was because he had easy access to his own company's funds. Nakamura's good nature and helpfulness meant that both companies would eventually go down. While watching the film, it's kind of hard to say if this was the great work of art that Nakamura wanted. I did find it educational, and it was definitely more theatrical from the other film, The Assassination of Ryoma. That film was a lot more artsy. This film also didn't have any of the weird nudity and weird sex scenes, but it also felt too long. I felt like there was just too much talking, too much dialogue, and not enough action. The action scene that we did get with Ryoma's gun was fun, and it did remind me a lot of the game. I have a feeling that the game was influenced more by this film than any of the others. But the story is also very confusing, actually kind of like the game, and it's a little dull. No one's performance really stood out either, but it still added to my interest of the character of Ryoma Sakamoto. After seeing this, I still want to know more about him. He's just such a fascinating real-life person, and even after 2 movies and the video game, I still want to know more. But the thing is, he's different in all 3 of these depictions. In the game, he's just this brave and strong hero. He's very much like Kazuma in the Yakuza series. He's a character that's confident and he's very much made up his mind on what he wants. In the film The Assassination of Ryoma, he's very self-doubting, he's confused, he's a sex addict, and in his last conversation with his best friend Shintaro, it's clear that he doesn't really know what to do after he changes Japan into a classless society. In this film, he's very confident, and he knows exactly what he wants for Japan. In his final conversation with Shintaro, he explains how even the emperor must step down from being a god, and he must become more human. And I feel like that's just a really big thing for a Japanese person to say at the time.
帝、人民と同じ人間の座にまで。恐ろしいことを言うぜ、恩赦。
It's also made known just how influenced he was by Western culture. And at the end of the day, I feel like all he really wanted was equality.
気違いとして無事に生きてはおれんでよ。
And his death in this film is a lot more tragic. You really wanted him to live. One interesting aspect about Ryoma's life is that the samurai in this film are depicted as their own worst enemy. Every mention of samurai honor becomes a trigger for more internal conflict. And this was during a time in Japan when they needed to be unified more than ever. This is when all the outsiders and foreigners were coming to Japan.
そんな外国の書物から学んだのか、龍馬。
So, in the beginning of the film, Ryoma decides to leave his clan after a pretty insane incident. So, it's raining and a samurai decides to loan a merchant a pair of wooden geta and an umbrella. A drunken samurai then meets a merchant and kills him. The reason, you might ask, is that it's because he was wearing a wooden sandal and an umbrella that was too good for him. Too good for a merchant. And before this incident's over, it just leads to dead bodies all over the street. The Tosa then sent out an assassin squad for Ryoma, and just for the crime of leaving his territory. And later, Kondo, who's another Tosa clan member, he's killed just because he dared to visit England. I guess that's a bad thing to do. The two most powerful clans end up not being able to bring themselves to unite against the shogun, mainly because one of the daimyos feels insulted that the other left a few days earlier. So there's a lot of hurt feelings and people being butthurt going on in this film. Ryoma's best friend Shintaro, he was played by Tatsuya Nakadai in this, he has for many years debated with Ryoma against his politics. And when the assassination of Ryoma is about to happen in this film, which is a well-known historical event, Shintaro says he will die with him. I'll admit, it is a little overdramatic. Still, I felt it. The peasants chant Aichinaka, or who cares? And we saw this in the other film, so I'm guessing this was a recorded event. Aichinaka indicates a non-violent uprising. And this would honestly end up being more important to the end of feudalism than Ryoma could have caused on his own had he lived. This shows how peasant can have power greater than the samurai.
Yosakoi.
The film itself doesn't really have too much action, and we just get a lot of dialogue. There's a lot of yelling, mostly has to do with politics of the time. When there actually is action scenes, it's done really well. You could tell that this director is good at doing them. Like I mentioned, it's the great scene with Ryoma just using his pistol while fighting off a group. It's just beautifully played out. I like how Ryoma's just fighting with his gun, and then when he gets wounded in his right hand, he quickly adapts and then switches to his left hand in sword style. It's very impressive and it reminds me of the game. Basically, Ryoma was a samurai who envisioned a post-shogunate, post-medieval world without class. He envisioned Japan as being this powerhouse in international trade. And because Ryoma dreamed of causing such change, he ended up with a lot of enemies. And he would not live to see how his vision came true in the end. So overall, I'd say this was a decent film, but I feel like it could have been a bit more epic. If there was some things fixed, it really could have been a great film. So if you're looking for a version of Ryoma Sakamoto that has a more closer vision to the video game, then I'd say that this portrayal is actually really good. Nakamura's character is definitely the closest to this. Other great versions of this film include Hideo Gosha's Hitokiri. I really like that film. Easily my favorite out of all these. You also have Kazuo Kuroki's The Assassination of Ryoma. That's definitely the more artsy option. And if you want to get all three of these films, you could get them on SamuraiDVD.com. Use the discount code BUSHIDO BLUES at checkout. Please subscribe. Join my Discord if you want to discuss other films. And if you want to support the channel, then please check out my Patreon. And like always, thanks for watching.